The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is your embassy in the heart of Israel, founded in 1980. From our headquarters in Jerusalem through our branches in over 80 nations and yours in Canada, we seek to challenge the church to take up its scriptural responsibility, to remind Israel of the promises made to her in the Bible, and to be a source of practical assistance to all the people in the land of Israel. On today's program, Israel's struggle for survival and a lawyer bankrupting terrorism one lawsuit at a time. A trip to Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem.
Hello, I'm Donna Holbrook, National Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in Canada. Most people today have become sensitive to environmental mismanagement and climate change. Let me tell you about a tiny country, not even the size of Vancouver Island off Canada's west coast, that has little fresh water, mostly desert, little rain, warm to hot temperatures, and few resources, that takes these very issues to heart. That would be Israel. At the turn of the century, the biblical land of Israel was desolate, treeless, because the Turks who occupied it taxed according to the number of trees you had on your property. Mark Twain visited Israel in 1867 and published his impressions in Innocents Abroad. He described a desolate country devoid of both vegetation and human population. He writes, "A desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse, a desolation we never saw a human being on the whole route, hardly a tree or shrub anywhere. Even the olive tree and the cactus, those fast friends of a worthless soil, had almost deserted the land." Yet when Israel was reborn as a nation in 1948, they drained the swamps that were malaria infested, planted thousands of trees each year on her barren hills, planted lush date palm groves along the shores of the Dead Sea in salty sand, used the Negev desert to provide solar energy not only to Israel but exported it to Germany and others through some of the largest solar plants in the world, developed the drip irrigation system to minimize use of water, yet yielding 3 times the crops, and exporting that technology to third world countries so they could grow the food they needed themselves. The list goes on.
Psalms 122, verse 6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee.
Hello and welcome to our panel discussion. Today we're discussing the quote by Netanyahu, "Sunnis, Shiites fight each other, but they agree Israel has no place in the Middle East." Now, it's important to note the context by which Netanyahu said this. He was actually toasting and honoring the 65th anniversary of the founding of the Mossad. He said that Israel can't solve all of the problems in the Middle East, but they are revealing themselves in, quote, full force. Now, the question that we're posing to our panel, Bob Mayton, Mark Vandermas, and Donna Holbrook, is this: is there validity in that statement declared by Netanyahu, and in what context? I'm going to start with you, Bob, on this one.
Yes, the Sunnis and the Shiites, Sunnis led by ISIL and also by Saudi Arabia, and the Shiites led by Iran at this point, have been at odds with each other for many, many years. And I think that has distracted them away from their preoccupation with Israel. They both have the intention of destroying Israel, but so far I think they've been distracted from that because of fighting each other. But I think the current events in the Middle East are really concerning because they create a real fluidity and an instability there. Russia has gone into Syria to bomb the American allies who are trying to get Assad out of office. Which has provoked the Americans. And I think this creates a real instability. There are a lot of people who are saying that the borders are being redrawn, that the Middle East is going to look very different in the next couple of years and possibly for generations to come. I think this is both a threat and an opportunity for Israel because Russia actually supports Israel. Bibi met with Putin a couple of weeks ago and received assurances that there were not going to be any efforts to undermine Israel or to attack Israel. And Russia considers, Mr. Putin considers Israel to be, in a sense, a Russian state, a Russian culture, because there are 50% of the population of Israel speaks Russian. And there are about 100,000 Israeli expats in Moscow. So there is some support from Russia, as Russia seems to be displacing the U.S. In the domination in this area.
Mark?
You know, I was very fortunate enough to attend a lecture by the author of the book called Son of Hamas, and you've probably heard of it, Mossab.
I've had the privilege to interview him.
Mossab.
Yes.
And he was, for those who don't know, he was the son of a Hamas founder
One of
who
the founders.
eventually went to work with Israel's security services to save lives. And he said something he said many things. It was a beautiful lecture. But the one thing that stood out for me was this amazing, pithy, and astute comment. And he said, the problem with the Middle East is that the West is trying to find a political solution to a religious problem. And what he meant by that is that you can talk about injustices all you want, but at the heart of the conflict, of the Arab-Jew conflict, is actually an Islamist-Jew conflict, right at the root of it. It's Islamic supremacy. And you know, all you have to do is read Article 11 of the Hamas Charter. And here's a little quote about this. This explains why they are trying to kill Jews, why they will not negotiate. They were not interested in peace. This is why you'll see Palestinian TV, children's TV glorifying the killing of Jews. And this is the stuff you don't see. I mean, here's what the Article 11 says. The legal status of Palestine, which was supposed to be Jewish according to the League of Nations, the legal status of Palestine according to Islamic law is like any other land that the Muslims have conquered by force. There's an admission for you. They didn't always own it, because the Muslims consecrated it at the time of the conquest as a religious endowment for all generations of Muslims until the day of resurrection.
Yes, Donna?
Well, getting back to the Shiite and the Sunnis, the collective Muslim mandate has no place for Jews or Christians. We know that. We are the infidels, according to Islam, to be subservient or to be killed. And yet I would like to quote something that came from Israel's Channel 2 News when they spoke to an ISIS spokesman in response to questions about the organization's intentions with regards to Israel, that ISIS first has to deal with Muslims who have become infidels themselves. The greatest answer to this question is in the Quran, where Allah speaks about the nearby enemy, those Muslims who have become infidels, as they are more dangerous than those which are already infidels.
Right. Now, you all gave some very interesting points, but we do need to make this known to our audience as well, that we're sitting here, we're a group of Christians, we're not proclaiming here our panelists to be experts in the field, and it's also worthwhile to note the context at which Netanyahu was speaking in terms of the role of Mossad. It's also worthwhile to note that historically, since the founding of Israel in 1948, some 10 million Muslims have been killed at the hands of other Muslims, which is it's a horrible tragedy, a horrible crime. But we also have to recognize, in addition to that, that not everybody from these various sects of Islam is entirely against Israel. Yes, normative Islam is Islamism, and I'm glad that you brought that out, the distinction between Islam and Islamism. It's very important, but there is a reform movement going on with the Quranist sect and with others, depending on what sect they happen to belong to. So we do need to understand the context at which Netanyahu did declare what he did, because it's very valid. I mean, the two of you pointed out as well, when you look at the charter, the Hamas charter, the PA charter, the Fatah charter, it all declares that Israel must be destroyed. And in fact, the PLO charter, in fact, the manifesto, in the original manifesto of the PLO, it was indicated that it was created for the purpose of, quote, liquidating Israel. So these things are very important to note, because Mossad gets a bad name, but when you look at the threats being faced by Mossad, it's another story. But at the same time, we have to be careful not to judge every Muslim, Shia, or Sunni paint them by the same brush, because we're dealing distinctly now here with the threat of Israel. And I don't know if you want to discuss any more with relation to that.
Well, I'd like to talk about the Iran nuclear deal, because I think this is a real concern, because Iran has been trying to bring the two sides together, the Sunnis and the Shia, together for the last few years. And have had some success in doing that, have built relationships with Hamas, for example, which is a Sunni organization. And now they're going into Syria. I think that the problem is that they have a lot more money because of the deal. And they also perhaps have a nuclear capacity, which they're developing. Inspections are now going to be carried out by themselves, not by outside experts, apparently. And this creates a real problem because they are the sworn enemies of Israel. They want to destroy Israel. Bringing all the Muslims together in opposition to Israel with a nuclear capacity is extremely dangerous for Israel. And Mr. Netanyahu has pointed this out on lots of occasions. His main concern is with Iran. Wants to settle things with the U.S., despite the deal, but is still in opposition to the deal.
Well, on a final note, the division that you see between the Shias and the Sunnis actually is good news in many respects because both sides are fighting for regional hegemony. So that's one thing. And any other final points before we close?
I think what the real tragedy and the flaw in this Iran deal was that the Jews were not sitting at the table. So you have a genocidal regime that's already threatened the extinction of the Jewish people and their state, and yet they're relegated to the back room. They should have been sitting at the table, and they should have been consulted, and no deal should have been made that they were not happy with. And I think it was immoral of the world not to do that. I spoke recently at a rally outside the U.S. consulate. I never thought in my lifetime I would be yelling at the U.S. consulate and talking about how America betrayed the Jewish people in the world. I think it's a sad day.
Israel stands isolated, and that's something we need to take into consideration.
Terrible.
Thank you very much for joining me. We'll be back with more of Inside Israel after this break.
Psalm 125:2. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever.
Nitzana, briefly tell us about your law firm and what it has achieved to date.
Shurat Adin is a civil rights organization based in Israel that have been taking the legal battle on behalf of the Jewish state, on behalf of the Jewish people. We go on the offense against Israel enemies like the terror organization that want to devastate the state of Israel. We take them to court. We take their financial patrons to court. Countries that support the terror organizations, banks that provide financial services to terror organizations. And in addition, we are taking the BDS movement to court and those who call to delegitimize the Jewish state, to indict IDF soldiers for war crimes, to alienate the Jewish state. So far, we've been holding judgments for more than $2 billion against different organizations. And we actually collected more than $200 million that went to the terror victims. We are able to stop the Gaza flotilla, the one that wanted to breach the sea blockades against Gaza. And we've been fighting and accomplishing our fights against the BDS and the Lawful Movement. In the end of November, Obama will sign off on the release, and $100 billion will be given to Iran as a part of the nuclear agreement. This is absolutely outrageous because Iran already said that they will continue to support terrorism. This money will go to the hands of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, which are waiting to launch the new war against Israel from the south, from the north. Iran already said that Israel has only 25 years to live, and they will make sure they will not have any one-day quiet. So by releasing these funds, United States is causing another disaster to the state of Israel, in addition to the nuclear agreement. We in Shurat Adin decided to file an injunction against the State Department and the Treasury not to release the funds, not only because it will go to the terror organizations, but also because we are representing tens of terror victims, and there are many, many more that are holding judgments on their behalf against Iran, which Iran never paid a dime. And this is the last chance to receive money for their judgments. So if United States want to release the funds, first Iran has to pay the money to the terror victims. It shows us how the international community is so desperate that they let Iran inspect itself. It started with the condition that the UN And different committees will watch what Iran is doing, but slowly, when Iran insisted that nobody will go to the territory or nobody will go to their nuclear facilities without their permission, and nobody will go there 24 days before they allow them to come in, Iran simply achieved what they insisted on. And the international community simply collapsed. And we are standing now in front of a terrible agreement, both to Israel and the rest of the Western world, because the nuclear missiles of Iran are not pointed out directly to Israel. They are pointed out to Saudi Arabia, to United States, to Qatar, to any other country that is considered to be the enemy of Iran. It's a real disaster.
With that $100 billion that will be flowing into Iran, much of it will be used to fund terrorism. Can you give us a rundown on where some of that funding is going to be going?
Look, Iran has a lot of proxies in the Middle East. The major one is Hezbollah, which they have been arming for many, many years, and they've been funding for many years. It's talking about tens of millions of dollars that just flow to the hands of Hezbollah, and tens of thousands of missiles that Iran manufactures and give Hezbollah. So first and foremost, this is a big threat against Israel, but also Hamas. Hamas in recent years went into a clash against Iran, but recently Iran warms up the relations and keep funding Hamas and keep letting them use missiles and other ammunitions. And Islamic Jihad, although it's a very small relative organization, still gets their funding from Iran because they stay the most loyal to the Iranian regime. So here you have at least 3 different organizations in the front line against Israel. But Iran has proved itself to combat not only Israelis, but American. They attacked the American embassy in Lebanon. They hijacked different planes with American citizens on them. Iran is a threat not to Israel only, but to the Western world. And I'm afraid that this money, talking about $100 billion plus, will partially go and fund these organizations. Iran doesn't have allies. Iran has opportunists that just see the unfreezing of the relationship with Iran as a great business opportunity. And you can see that companies from Europe already rush to Iran. You can see a pressure from American companies to go and start relations with Iran. And all this because Iran has tremendous amount of oil. They have tremendous industry that can provide many, many corporations. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. The one that help Iran militarily is, their regular allies like North Korea, like China, like Russia. And they have been, keeping relations with Iran for all these years, despite the UN sanctions, despite the European sanctions. They have been in touch with them the whole time. And obviously now when it's free, now when there is nobody to report to or nobody to take into account, they can come and just continue and develop Iran to the huge country, to the empire that they really want to be. Right, look, what we're doing in Shurat Adin is trying to block the funding coming from these regimes. We are going after Iran's funding to the terror organizations. If Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Hezbollah carry out terror attacks, we file a lawsuit against Iran because we see them as responsible for funding these terror organizations. We get judgments against Iran and we're going after their assets, we're going after bank accounts they are holding in different countries, we're going after buildings and assets that they have in different countries. And I think we're making a significant move because we really see that once you attach the assets of Iran, Iran does not keep silent. They come to court, they send lawyers, they fight back. They don't want us to reach to their pocketbooks. I think they feel very embarrassed that Jews or Israelis or terror victims of any kind go and take their money. I'm very positive that these cases are influencing the regimes, not to an extent that they will stop funding terrorism, but in a way that we are obstructing the way they were doing until now and funding the terror organizations. We will go after the Lebanese banks, because this is the banks that Iran funds Hezbollah. We will go after the Central Bank of Iran, because this is where Iran keeps its money and funds the terror organizations. We will go after any bank that helps Iran to fund the organization, and we'll go after the terror organization themselves. We learned in all our years in the organization that money is the oxygen to the terror organizations, to the terrorism, and if you block the flow of the money, you can block the flow of the terrorism.
Up next, Bible Lands Museum.
We have today with us a very special guest, Mrs. Amanda Weiss, who is the director of the Bible Land Museum here in the city of Jerusalem. Amanda, it's such a great pleasure to have you here on our show today.
It's an even greater pleasure for us because we're sitting in the heart of the museum, and that's a real privilege to be able to show the museum in this opportunity. Thank you.
Now, this museum, which you are the director of, is called the Bible Lands Museum, and as I understand, the Bible and the content of the Bible is the main subject of all the artifacts here in this museum. Tell us a little bit about the story of that museum and what it's all about.
It's an unusual museum. It's a museum of ancient history. And it's a museum of the history of the lands of the Bible. Some people see our name of the museum and think they're going to walk in and see Bibles all over the galleries. And it's really not what you see, but what you do see is the physical evidence of the cultures, the civilizations of our forefathers. When we read our Bible, it didn't only happen right here in the Holy Land. It happened in this entire region, the stories that we read about the journey of Abraham. If you think about the Exodus from Egypt, and as we look at the galleries around us here in the museum, we're surrounded by those cultures in those time periods. And the artifacts themselves are the historicity of the Bible.
So how far back do the artifacts actually go?
Well, we predate a little bit. We come into very early beginnings of civilization from Neolithic and Paleolithic material, which is about 5,000 before the Common Era.
Wow.
So we take a little bit of a deep breath and we go a little bit beyond it. In Israel, we look at the Bible, what you would call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, and we actually then also go later and go into early Christianity, into Roman Judea and the beginning of Byzantine and Coptic Egypt. And the Babylonian Talmud period, which of course for us is extremely important. And so we've basically taken a slightly larger envelope to look at the historicity, the history of this region, and the Bible as our history book.
And what is the result of the museum? Does it actually underline the message of the Bible and proves that those people really were alive?
Well, I think absolutely it does, because if you look at artifacts and you're looking at real finds that have been studied and researched by the greatest experts, whether they be people of faith or not, it becomes indefutable fact that the Bible existed. And the more we excavate, and for every listener or visitor to Israel that comes to see this country, you're walking on the top surface, but underneath us, the archaeology of this land are layers and layers of history. The science of archaeology unveils and helps us discover more information every year. For people who don't live here, they don't realize that archaeology makes headline news. But why? Because it proves the Bible in so many cases now.
And if you come to your museum, basically you see all those artifacts which do, in a way, strengthen your faith if you come here.
Absolutely right. And what you see here is a little bit beyond what you'll see just of Israel, because we didn't only take place here. All right. Israel sits, if we look at the geopolitical map of the ancient world, all right? Yes. And if you open up your atlas today and you say, well, where is Israel? I'm going to travel there. I'm going to come for the Feast of Tabernacles this year. All right? Well, how am I going to get there? I land in Tel Aviv, and where is Jerusalem? When you open your Bible, the map is much bigger. And you have ancient Egypt. You have Mesopotamia, which is today Iraq. You have the Persian Empire, which is Iran, all the way to the east, to the far east, almost to the Indus River and a little beyond. You have the Turks in the north, and you have Nubia in the south. We have this huge area that we encompass, and that's what you see in the museum. And it's presented universally, Jürgen. It's presented in a way that people of all faiths can come and read the Bible. We have material from the Exodus of Egypt.
Wow.
And we talk about that. We have material from the first temple of Jerusalem, and we go on into the Babylonian exile, which is the first time Jews were exiled from Jerusalem and created the first diaspora communities in ancient Babylon, and on into Roman Judea. So we look at the evidence, the development and survival, if you will, the quest for religious freedom in Judaism and in Christianity. The early Christian art that shows the most beautiful examples of art, we look at it today, yes, are in Christianity, because the finest artists shared the biblical stories. The miracles of Jesus are seen in ancient art so beautifully. They are the narrative. They were the Facebook and the internet, yes, of the ancient world, and that's the way the stories were shared and told.
We conclude our program today with some sights and sounds within Israel. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. 100% of what we receive from you toward a project goes to that designation. Through your contribution to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Shoulder to Shoulder Alias Support, Bet Singer Children's Home, Israel in Crisis, ICEJ Communication Media Fund, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Magen David Adom Emergency Services, Canada Israel Young Adult Scholarship, Equip and Teach, Bet Rachel Strauss Inclusive Community, Gift, Estate, and Securities Funds.